Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from just northwest of Brisbane, Australia, we have Brad King. Brad is the founder of Farm Animal Rescue, a sanctuary-based animal rights organization that focuses on education and awareness. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. One of the things that always interests me is how and why people do things. Can you tell us what inspired you to start Farm Animal Rescue?
Yeah, I was actually inspired by Farm Sanctuary in the US. I was living in Florida at the time, and I'd got involved with organizing some of the Walk for Farm Animal events that they have in Miami. And that led me eventually to go and visit the place. And I was really impressed with the education programs that we're running. So in our own way, we've tried to set up something similar here with a definite focus on education. So we're very big on the visits, and all of the information we put out through social media and our email systems is very much about education and trying to describe the stories that the animals have experienced.
What was it about starting an animal rescue that resonated with you?
I've always had a thing about fairness. And when it comes to animals in food industry, there's nothing fair about the system at all. So I was certainly driven by that. But I felt that, and it's what we see every time we open the farm. We see people who leave differently to the way that they arrived. So I just think that the way that we can do this with the animals as ambassadors is extremely impactful, and it has a more lifelong impact on people than perhaps other forms of advocacy do.
What are some of the unique challenges that are specific to Australia as far as animal rescue?
Oh dear, yeah. I joke about this a lot actually because in finding out about what Farm Sanctuary's challenges were, it's all about coyotes and eagles and hawks and all that sort of stuff. And then I got to Australia, and it's all about ticks here. So we have a small tick called a paralysis tick, which literally paralyzes and kills animals. So I was all ready to deal with the big old predators, and it's actually this tiny little thing, which is something we have to be very concerned about. We have management systems in place, of course, that deal with that. But the other aspect, of course, is Australia's climate is harsh. It's either raining or it's not. So we've had about 3 years where it never stopped raining, and now we're going into probably 3 or 4 years of no rain at all. So dealing with the climate here is a significant challenge. And of course, it's getting worse year on year. It's becoming more problematic as we're seeing all across the planet.
Now, as far as ticks, can you describe what happens? And I mean, you said it's paralysis, but where do they pick up the ticks? Is it just like running through the bush, or how does it work?
Yeah, the ticks live in the bushes or even in the grasses. And of course, to a tick, I suppose, a cow especially, is just a big sack of blood. So that's really what they're coming after. So they'll attach, and then rather than just drawing blood, they actually inject, for some bizarre reason, they inject a venom at the same time. And with, I mean, especially with the younger animals, one tick can actually take them out and kill them. With animals like cows, around 100 would still be capable of bringing a cow down. So they're very small and very mighty. But as you know, everything kills you in Australia. So
I was about to say, there's like the king brown, and there's these, the funnel spider or something. You got the jellyfish. Is there anything that doesn't kill you?
And yet we are full of eastern browns here. It's the second most venomous snake in the world. We have loads of them on the farm, and they are absolutely no trouble. They really aren't. Sometimes, you'll be out doing fence work and they'll sit there and watch you,
Huh.
which used to worry me until one day I saw some chickens chasing an eastern brown out of the chicken yard. And
Really?
I realized that maybe there's a little less to worry about here than what you would think. Still a very, very dangerous animal, obviously, but if you're sensible around them, if you don't, if you don't try to kill them or push them away or something, then they'll just get on and do their own thing. They can't eat us, so they're not interested in us.
Mm. Now, what is the natural predator for the ticks?
It would be birds. So birds who eat insects
Mm.
would be the predator for them. But and I've probably got the figures a little bit wrong, but my understanding is that one tick has something like 3,000 babies.
Hmm.
So the numbers multiply ridiculously. But it
Right.
would be it would be insect eaters that would eat them.
What is your favorite part of what you do?
My favorite part has got to be seeing the impact that we have on, not that we have, that the animals have on people. Just and it's so surprising in so many ways because the animals that have the most impact that we find are the pigs,
Mm.
which I just find there's such a disconnect with because we treat pigs so abominably as a species,
Mm.
and yet everybody adores them. And broiler chickens.
Hmm.
So the broiler chicken habitat is literally one where people will get there and you just see jaws completely dropping, because they can't believe what's been done to this breed of chicken in order to, make food fast, inexpensive, and whatever else they're trying to achieve. So it's just incredible to see how that simple interaction can have such a lasting and permanent impact on people.
Right.
Definitely the best part of it.
Speaking of broiler chickens, recently there was a rollover of chickens and you had a team on site.
Yeah,
Could you tell us what happened and what they saw?
it's actually a really common occurrence in Australia is livestock truck rollovers. It happens so often. It's really quite disgusting. The trucks here are very, very high and very, very long,
Mm.
that they do these things with. And this was actually the second accident that had occurred in that exact same place
Hmm.
with a chicken truck from the same farm.
Hmm.
So of course, thousands of chickens on the backs of these trucks. They're traveling not a terribly long distance to get from where they've been grown, as they call it, to the processing plant. And they simply take the roundabout too fast. Over goes the truck, and then of course, you end up with live chickens, injured chickens, and dead chickens just all over the place.
What is your favorite animal?
I'm not allowed to answer that. It's like asking who your favorite kid is. Uh, um, the ones that I like best, though, are the ones who are rebellious and don't want to do the right thing and want to have a go back. And I sometimes wonder because, of course, we have a very strict no breeding policy because, we're trying to make the problem better, not worse.
Hmm.
So we don't breed on the farm, but I sometimes wonder if we shouldn't be breeding those that are, or allowing to breed those that are really rebellious and have a bit of fight in them, because it would be great to introduce that to the species, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be.
Time to fight back.
What is the reason that you feel people have become so removed from farm animals?
I think there's two things to it. I think animal industry marketing is phenomenal. They are so good at what they do, and they have these narratives which is incredible because this is why everybody thinks now that, if you want calcium you have to drink dairy, and if you
Mm.
want iron you have to eat steak, and that's because the industry for so many years has told them that's how it is, and of course we know it's complete nonsense, but
Hmm.
this is how they've made it happen. The other part of it is, though, is that humans have an ability to just ignore information that isn't convenient to us.
Mm.
And I think we can see this in the way that, if you're looking at huge natural disasters, if they happen in America, we pay a lot more attention than a disaster that might happen in Syria, let's say,
Hmm.
because we just have a way of excluding information that isn't comfortable for us. And it's probably part of what we need to do to survive because there's a lot of bad stuff that happens. But I think we employ that very effectively when it comes to animal agriculture, because we like to fit in, we like to do things like everybody else. We like to buy the cheap stuff,
Hmm.
and any information about the agriculture industry is simply not convenient.
It's very true. What do you find is the best way to help people understand where their food comes from?
Well, we think it's very much meeting the animals who have come out of the industry. So we don't tend to rescue from backyards.
Hmm.
Our animals have all, in some way, managed to come out of the animal agriculture um, industry locations. So these are all animals who have very real lived experience of what it's like to be inside factory farms and inside agriculture. We've actually got three lambs who came out of a slaughterhouse. They were rescued minutes before they were going down the slaughter line.
Mm.
And it's incredible to see how even today, which is 4 or 5 years later, they're just so completely damaged by that whole experience. And of course, when we explain that, and when people get to see just how fearful they are of them, it's incredible because so many people understand that their dog has emotions
Mm.
and relates to them and has things they like and things that they don't like. But as a society, we've just assumed that that doesn't apply to farmed animals, that farmed animals just sort of wander around, just having no real concept of their presence or what their expectations should be of their life. And this is even when we're looking at animals like pigs, who are the fifth most intelligent species on the planet. There's again, it's convenient, and I'd say that the marketing has helped as well, just to make us think that these are dumb creatures who only exist for that one purpose.
Now, when you mentioned pigs, you also mentioned earlier that people respond to pigs. What is it about pigs that you feel that they really resonate with people?
I think a lot of it is that pigs seek out affection. So
Mm.
pigs like to get affection from people. Of course, the belly rubs with pigs is very, a very famous part of their personality. And the fact that, somebody can approach a pig and they'll roll over for a belly rub, I think brings back to us all of those experiences that we've had with domestic animals and with anybody really who is wanting to show us affection. We tend to, sort of establish this link with. And I think pigs bring that out in people, but it's also not difficult to see the intelligence in pigs. And I think people see that very quickly as well. And just the fact that pigs really don't comply. So all of the other farmed animals, they have trained them to follow instructions to comply, and the cows will come to the milking shed at this time. And all the others, they sort of managed to get into this process that they have to follow daily. Pigs don't do that. So that's why, of course, we have the factory farms. That's why they have these really high, strong fences in them. That's why the gestation crates are set up the way that they are, because they can't get the pigs to comply. So they have to fence them in this way. And I think everybody likes a bit of rebellion in that way. But they really do. They have enormous personalities, much greater personalities than I would say even humans do. And you've got to love that.
Sounds like you really like the pigs.
Again, I like the rebels.
Exactly. The unfortunate side of a rescue or sanctuary is the death of the residents.
Yep.
How do you personally deal with the death of the residents?
I'd like to say there was a strategy for it, but the truth is there's just so much that needs to be done. you don't really have time to stop and dwell on these things because you're always having to move on to the next thing.
Mm.
It becomes as well a very mechanical thing, especially with the larger animals, because of course you have an immediate issue that needs resolving because there's a carcass that needs to be dealt with very, very quickly. So you become sort of very mechanical about dealing with all the things that need to be dealt with as a result of that. But you know, there are certainly animals that will have a greater effect on you than others. Certainly, those from early on when we established the sanctuary are harder
Hmm.
to deal with because when you had a smaller number, of course, you knew them so much better. Um, and of course, when it's a younger animal, there's no way of ever that feeling good. It's a reality. It's part of the game. Every animal that you rescue is ultimately going to die. So you know it's an important part of the game, and I think you need to go into it understanding that
Mm.
and just being aware that it's going to happen. It's a natural process.
Right. Still hard though.
Yes, yes, but that's important. That's what makes a sanctuary different to agriculture. Is that we value the life of the animal and we understand that they left a mark on the world that will never go away.
What do you feel is the best way to promote and educate and encourage compassion, cruelty free living? I know that you said that you know, the visits from the people and things like that, but in which way do you affect the people?
Well, we actually think that one of the most important parts of this, and something that none of us do terribly well, is the importance of supportive communities. So, you know, we start with the stories of the animals, which are often horrific and often represent great change. But there is a piece then as well about supporting people who are going back out into a world that is forcing them into the opposite direction and just sort of keeping a relationship there and trying to keep people in an environment where they feel able to make lifestyle changes. Unfortunately, it's a difficult thing to do, and especially from a sanctuary perspective, it's difficult because we are really crazy busy anyway. But I don't think we've really got the idea of these things being, you know, sort of lifetime commitments. It's a little bit like the whole Alconomics Anonymous thing, I guess, where you know when you go into these things, you tend to have a mate who's looking after you,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people really would benefit from that, particularly when they don't have other vegans or other people attempting to live cruelty free in their life. So I think what we're trying to work towards is starting with the animal story, but then developing on the human story as well about living cruelty free in this world.
Right. So it's sort of a creating a buddy system where they can take some of the information that they've learned at the sanctuary, at the rescue, and when they go back out, obviously the world changes them. But having that buddy system to kind of keep them on the right track.
Yeah, because it's amazing. You know, people come into the sanctuary and they're so moved by what they've seen and what they've experienced that they right there make, you know, really quite dramatic commitments to how they want to live their life going forward. Because as soon as you go outside of the gates, the pressure is to not do that.
Mm,
Um, and it's an awful thing. You know, our marketing has never been as good as the marketing that comes from animal agriculture. Will never be. That's where all the money is.
right.
Um, and just the power of persuasion and the power of people's groups that they've always known and grown up with
Hmm.
is overwhelming, of course. So it's a difficult thing because we're a movement that requires a level of commitment probably greater than most other movements. And I think our suggestion to people is don't come once, come regularly, so that you can recharge and you can experience that over and over again. It can remind you why you're doing this difficult thing.
Mm, that's a great point. Let's switch from farm animal rescue to your personal story.
Mhm.
How and when did you transition to a plant-based diet?
So I'm about probably 20 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been. It was in Miami. And it was because of a dog that we had taken in from a shelter, and he had been a puppy farm stud,
Mm.
and very, very damaged by the experience there for his whole life. This was never a normal dog. Had quite bad heart disease as well, of course, from a result of the fact that the conditions were so unsanitary and his teeth weren't being looked after and all that type of thing. So as awful as all that was, though, what surprised me, because it was different to everything I'd ever been told, were the nightmares that he was having.
Hmm.
Because you could absolutely see the distress that was going on while this dog was asleep, and it was news to me that an animal could in any way have nightmares. That wasn't something that I understood was possible. So that just spurred me to start having a look around and see what was going on. Of course, the internet was quite well established 20 years ago, so I had access to everything that was being there. And of course, I was absolutely horrified. I'd been vegetarian for 20, 30 years before that,
Mm-hmm.
and never looked into animal agriculture because I felt as a vegetarian it wasn't relevant to me. What I discovered, of course, was dairy and eggs and all this sort of thing, and just absolute horror. It was interesting then, though, because the first step that I decided to take once I was armed with this information was to set up an advocacy group in Miami that would actually start to, try to make this information available to people. And it wasn't until I'd had a couple of meetings with this group that I set up that I suddenly realized that I probably, and because at the same time I'd been looking for, cruelty-free cheese and cruelty-free eggs, and how you can make these things work. Very quickly coming to the understanding, of course, that there's no such thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like two or three meetings in with these people before I realized that I probably just needed to stop eating this stuff, because otherwise I was being highly hypocritical. But it's just really quite amazing, isn't it, that when you come from a place of not understanding there's problems with these things, to then being confronted with the information, it's kind of like you're looking for an acceptable alternative. You're not looking immediately to say, I'm just going to take these things out in my own life. You're looking at a way that you can do it that fits in with your ethical perspective. So I still look back at that and think, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? But it took maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and I was absolutely on the vegan train, and I was very, very grateful that Whole Foods existed.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good place to get stuff.
Well, then, of course, we moved to Australia about 12 years ago, and there was nothing here at all. So that
Mm.
was a difficult transition, but it's changed very, very much in the last 10 years.
What is it about vegetarianism? You mentioned that you didn't process the fact that you had anything to do with the cruelty that was going on. And I think that's a common thing.
Mm.
What I'm wondering, I guess, is why is that people have that disconnect between the vegetarianism and veganism when it's so close, you would think that they might just take a look at it.
I think it's just lack of information.
Mm,
That was certainly my case. So I had never really done any research. It just seemed wrong to me from a very early age to eat an animal when that wasn't necessary to do.
right.
Um, People certainly back then would talk about the fact that no animal gets killed to make cheese, no animal gets killed to make an egg. You don't research it because that's what everybody's telling you.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of compassionate people who have made the choice to be vegetarian simply because they don't want to kill animals. But unless you have the research and the information to know exactly what happens in these industries, then you're not going to know that perhaps, that's not going far enough.
Right.
So I don't think anybody just gets all of the information and says, okay, well, my next step is vegetarian. As we know, the dairy and egg industries are arguably the worst that's out there.
Agreed.
I think it's just a lack of information. And with a lot of people who are compassionate in that way, of course, they don't really want to go and look at these videos. They don't really want to go and see what's going on because it's distressing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a roadblock as well to people actually taking that step. But when people come to visit the sanctuary, we probably talk about the dairy and egg industries more than we do anything else. So that's where we start. We keep it very non-confrontational. We never tell people what to do, but there's actually a lot to tell about dairy and eggs, and generally it's much more poorly understood than the other industries. So people know in order to make meat, they have to kill an animal. People without doing research don't know that in order to make cheese, you have to kill animals. So it's all education, I think.
Right. When you changed over, were there any positive changes, any negative changes, any changes at all that you felt affected you
From going to vegan,
from vegetarian to vegan?
oh my goodness, yes. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the energy, the lightness of the food that you're eating, your digestive system works so much incredibly better. I would like to say peace of mind, but that's not really what I found. And I've seen this in a lot of people, is that the first year can actually be extremely difficult because you can't get the images out of your head and you can't stop thinking
Mm,
about what's going on there and you become very angry. So I'd like to say you feel, gentle and all peace of mind here, but that wasn't my experience at all. But I think you do feel like you're more in sync with the planet and that you are more naturally becoming where you belong in our ecosystem as opposed to being what you were before. But I've got to say the health benefits I thought were just unbelievable. And the food is awesome. The focus on spices and the 400,000 different vegetables that are available and the way that things are seasoned and just the focus on tasty food when it comes to vegan stuff is just so different to where I came from, which was basically pasta, vegetables, and cheese on top.
right.
So I remember people used to say when we did advocacy in Miami, they used to say, "Oh, but I love my food too much," and I'm saying it's absolutely not a roadblock because the food that comes out in the vegan community is just beyond and so very good. So I really, really liked the food. I like my
So do I. I can tell you this much. I was never a kale person. Had no idea what kale was before I changed over to being vegan. I was like, I have no idea. Now I love it. And that's the thing. You come to a point where there's so many other vegetables, and you look back, and
food.
you're looking at any. I would say the standard American diet is basically going to be chicken, fish, beef, and pork. And that's
Yeah,
basically it. That like every meal.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
just shuffle it around. Meanwhile, like, the vegans we're just eating all different things, legumes, tofu, who knows? There's just so many more things for us to eat. So,
yeah. That's right. And the understanding of flavor and spices and that type of thing is just so much more elevated. It really is. So I was very surprised that actually that was a really, really positive part of it was that actually you discover just the variety of food that's really available to us as humans.
right. When you did transition over, did you ever have any difficulties, whether it was with friends or family or traveling or anything like that, that you might have had an issue with when you transitioned to becoming plant based?
I certainly never had issues with other people. I don't tend to do what other people tell me to do. So I've sort of started from the right place on that front. I think possibly the anger that I had for a while about the situation and my inability to understand why other people who received the same information would not adapt in the way that I had, frustrated me for a while. And I think I was possibly a little bit unpleasant to be around at certain stages.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I wouldn't say I ever lost a friend through any of that process. I think they just used to roll their eyes and just get on with stuff. But of course, what I did find in Miami, because I've gone about setting up these groups, I became involved with the Animal Rights Foundation of Florida down there. So, of course, I immediately had this new community. And still, some of my best friends in the world are in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
because this group was just such a wonderful group of people who really, really wanted to see change. And of course, we were in a great opportunity to do that because everybody on the planet visits Miami. So we were always talking to people from overseas about things that they could do. We had probably one of the first street video setups anywhere,
Mm.
for advocacy. So that was a really great thing to do. But really, the friends that I made and the luck that I had in being able to establish and share in that community meant that I didn't really worry about other people anyway, because this was my new tribe. But again, this just goes back to the importance of community and the importance of support.
Right. Sounds like you really like Miami.
It used to be a great place. I'm not so sure that I'm sure Miami's still great, but I'm not so sure about Florida anymore.
Yeah, I think that when you're at a place like that at that time and that space, when you're meeting all those people and all the friends that you have, that's like the perfect time to be there. Whenever that time was or is.
Yes, yeah, very true.
When you mentioned that you were angry, can you give us an example of that?
I think I internalized it generally, but it really was all about just coming from a place where you think the world is fair and reasonable. And you think that even though there are issues and, there is crime and there are some countries that do the wrong thing, you, or I believe I was raised with the belief that ultimately the baseline of everything is that there is good. And that's how the world operates. And everybody's trying to be fair and everybody's trying to be good and everybody's trying to do the right thing. And for me, veganism was just really the start, though, of understanding more about blood diamonds, how chocolate is sourced, the realities of fair trade, the way that the West has done such awful things to the rest of the world, and I suddenly realized that I was actually not in a fair and equitable world where everybody was trying to make things the best way they could be for everybody on the planet,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually there's a lot of evil out there, and there's a lot of people who are just in it for themselves. And I think possibly when I just almost gave up all hope and the despair was just getting above me was when all of the Guantanamo Bay stuff came out.
Mm-hmm.
And, the fact that they've been using torture techniques that have been fatal in some cases. Um, and it wasn't so much that that's what happens there, but when the information was released, I just felt that there was a real lack of reaction to that appearing. The usual fringe groups were jumping up and down about it, but I didn't see any reaction from the majority of society to what had been done to these poor people, offshore in Cuba. Um, and I looked at that and I thought, well, if we can't even relate to torture being wrong, then why is anybody ever going to care about animals and the
Mm-hmm.
way that they're treated? And that was a really, really dark time for me, um, because I felt, and it was all part of me discovering, how the world really works,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually the baseline of good that I thought was there really isn't. So it was desperate and angry and confused, and it made me who I am today.
Is that one of the reasons that you feel that you started the rescue? was to shine a little light of good in the world.
Well, one of the things that's very important to me is leaving the planet better than the way that you came into it. So making something happen, understanding we probably can't fix the macro problems, but trying to make something better, trying to shine a light on somewhere very dark and cruel, and try to make a difference in that area. I certainly had a very significant need to make something better because I can't just stand by and just let the planet be as it is. I mean, I would love to get into all sorts of things, but you have to focus on something, don't you? And this was achievable. Hundreds of animals have had nice lives as a result of what we've set up here and what we're working with. So their lives have definitely been made different. And we know from the feedback we get and people who come back and visit us years later that we're absolutely having an impact on the community. And that's a really, really important thing for us to understand and be motivated by, is just the fact that there are people out there who will get the same information and will react in the right way. And it's so encouraging, of course, to see that as the generations are moving on and younger people are, moving into these spheres and everything, we're seeing a very different outlook in terms of the sort of addiction that we used to have to meat and dairy and stuff when I was growing up. And
Hmm.
the younger people now, what I see is it's not really important if it's made of meat or if it's made of some other product. If it tastes good, I'll eat it. And of course, this is a great place to be. And I'm very, very encouraged by the cell cultured meats
Hmm.
and the progress that's happening, because I actually think that's going to have an enormously dramatic effect on the planet. So I think it's good because I came from a very, very dark place. I was able to find a way that I felt I could improve things and make a difference. And now I'm actually seeing the positive things that are happening that can actually get us to somewhere better than where we came from.
Where did you get the courage to start your rescue?
I don't know if it's courage as much as it is just going for it. I do remember that the song out of Wicked was out at the time, what was it, Defying Gravity.
Hmm.
And I felt that was very relevant. But I think as well, you go through life and you're getting older, and you've got to start thinking about, it's important that I was here and it's important that I do something. And it's like, do I continue being in the corporate world, and doing all of these things that really just aren't important?
Mm.
Or do I use the time that I have left to actually make something happen that is important? And yeah, made the leap from there.
What is it about farmed animals that makes you so passionate?
It's quite simply how abysmally they're treated. I see a lot of focus that goes into dogs and cats. I see a lot going in there. I see a lot going on for wildlife. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know many wildlife because of what we have done in terms of their habitats and what we do with our roads and everything. A lot of wildlife is suffering, and I think that's really significant. But there are a good number of wildlife organizations set up to do what they can. They have a huge task, but there it is. But there's so little focus on farmed animals, which we just consider to be commodities, and that really we torture so badly for no particularly good reason. So I'm always going to be with the underdog, and to me, farmed animals are the underdog.
I've noticed that the value that you have of fairness is extremely important to you.
Yes,
What is it about fairness that makes it so important?
I think it's a little bit of an Australian thing because I did grow up here, and fair go is actually an Australian phrase
Hmm.
that's used a lot. Give them a fair go. So I don't know if it's the culture that I came from or the experiences that I had in growing up. I remember quite vividly watching the King Kong movie and just being completely distraught about, what happened to this poor giant ape. And everything that I thought about it was just that it's so unfair because people had put this animal in the situation that he was in, and that was why ultimately he was destroyed.
Mm.
And there was really just nothing fair about that. I think it's just been ingrained in me, or it was a belief I had as well, was that ultimately everybody in the planet was trying to make a fair and equitable society.
Hmm.
And this is probably part of the process of coming through and seeing that actually that's not true, and that's not what a lot of people's objectives are. But it's very, very core to who I am.
What is one thing that's really exciting for you right now, either in your life or with the rescue?
The thing I'm most excited about is cell cultured meats,
Mm.
and of course the work they're doing on dairy and cheeses now as well, because I know that the price point ultimately is going to be great, and I know that it's just going to have such a phenomenal effect on the agriculture industry as it stands. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that coming in and just seeing all of these industries just so wholly decimated. That's a that's probably what I'm looking forward to more than anything else. They need to get it out there and get it on sale. Sorry.
What is the most rewarding part of what you do?
It is very much about seeing the impact that the animals have on people who visit. There are certainly moments as well when you're out in paddocks and things, and you can almost see the appreciation from these guys, watching them go from the condition that they come in sometimes to just becoming, fully fledged and free. We're a little bit different to a lot of sanctuaries because we actually are completely free roaming. So we don't
Hmm.
have different paddocks and pens and everything. We've basically got the 55 acres, and the animals get to travel where they want to within that area. So I just really much, very, very much enjoy walking through perhaps one of the forests that we have, because we don't just have paddocks, we have paddocks and forests. And just walking through the forest and seeing just a bunch of goats just sort of wandering through the forest in the other direction, and just understanding how special and rare that is,
Mm.
because this is how they're meant to live. This is how nature designs their lives, and it's really a very, very special thing to see, because I realize that nobody else ever sees that. It's just me.
Mm. It's beautiful. Finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you were vegan and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
You limit me to one word, gee.
Hmm.
I don't know if I can do that. Well, my one word for before would be naive,
Hmm.
and my one word for after would be, I guess, educated.
Mm. That's great. It's very good. Such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. What is the best way for people to follow you, support you, either on Instagram, the web, social media in general?
Yeah, well, of course, we're out there on everything like everybody is these days. We've got quickly growing base on TikTok as well. We're loving that platform. So any of the social medias, you can find us at Farm Animal Rescue. Our website has lots of updates about what's going on and what we're doing as well at farmanimalrescue.org.au. But really, go onto Google, type Farm Animal Rescue, and anything that comes up will work. It's all very nicely integrated. But we very much like for people to read our stories and share them, because sharing the stories of the animals who have suffered through animal agriculture really is an important part of how we're going to influence everybody to understand better that what's happening to these animals is just not right.
Thanks again, Brad, for being on Plant Your Seed.
So it's a real pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.